Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Leaders in Value Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Managing Director of Elcott Global, and it is my pleasure to have with us today David Nothacker, who is the co-founder and CEO of Sennder. When Sennder was launched just outside of Paris in 2015, it was really an idea that came out of an MBA university project to create a leading logistics startup. And at that point, it felt like a big dream. Well, today, Sennder is the largest digital road freight forwarder in Europe. It connects large shippers such as AB InBev, Coca-Cola, and many others with family-owned trucking companies with 5 to 50 trucks. It also, for example, runs all of the Italian post trucking, all of it that's done by Sennder on a daily and yearly basis. Sennder is digitalizing an incredibly inefficient and fragmented 350 billion industry in Europe with over 400,000 trucking companies. And under David's leadership, they've so far connected over 12,500 trucks, completed more than 500,000 FTL shipments throughout Europe, and built a company that currently is about 1,000 staff in 11 offices all over Europe. So David, looking forward to the discussion, and thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you, Radu. Same here. Looking forward.
So maybe let's start, as always, how we do the podcast with yourself. So you're Swiss born, you're Swiss, German, speaks Italian in the Italian side of Switzerland. So very interesting background. You spent quite a bit of time in your career at Roland Wenger, which is one of the very good consulting firms of the world. And then at some point you set up Sennder about 9, 10 years ago. But beyond the CV, there's usually some moments in time which made the whole lot of difference. So I want to invite you to share with us some of those moments, those inflection points that really mattered to you.
Absolutely. Maybe I can share one or two. One you actually already mentioned, which was when I graduated from my MBA at INSEAD. I thought I had the best business plan ever and a beautiful looking PowerPoint presentation as a former consultant. So I said, okay, let's move to Berlin to execute on this perfect idea. 1 year in to this idea, my co-founder from my MBA and I had exactly 0 customers and therefore 0 revenue. Probably we should have picked up a bit earlier that the idea was not as perfect and there was absolute no product market fit. And then one of the inflection points was when we were running out of money. We still managed to convince an angel investor to invest. We signed a term sheet, and literally a few minutes after we signed the term sheet, my back then co-founder told me, David, I'm leaving. I'm going back to consulting. And it was a bit lowest moment probably in the story of Sennder. My first co-founder and I were living together, and on the way back home, we were already planning of, how to file for insolvency, how to, distribute the 7, 8 people that we had in the company, maybe in other companies that we knew. When I got back home, that was maybe the inflection point. I called my father, who is also an entrepreneur, explained him the situation. And my dad said, David, for a young entrepreneur, it's always good to learn very early on what such a process means. But he told me before you file, there's one last thing you should try. And this one last thing was to go back to that angel investor and try to get the money on my own. And my dad said, you have nothing to lose. You went so far, just try it. If he says no, it's clear. If he says yes, you can still say no if you don't want to do this on your own and so on, but just try it. You have nothing to lose. And I said, okay, fair enough. Cut the long story short, I went back to the angel investor, was very disappointed because I didn't know, but he thought I knew and we played him. But I managed to convince him. So he gave me some money, found 2 new co-founders, and then in 2017, he restarted Sennder 2.0 with the business model that you just described.
What a story, yeah. It pays off to have great parents, yeah, and it always pays off. And
Absolutely.
one, I think, there's quite a lot of great parents out there. I have 2 kids. I hope one day, or even now, I am a great parent, even if they may or may not agree to that statement. I think what pays off is listening to your great parents, which we may or may not be that good at doing. So maybe that's credit to you.
Yeah, well, he definitely that was a special moment, and especially in difficult moments when you're kind of lost. I think this is when parents can play an important role in your life.
Yeah, you mentioned one or two more, so I want to probe a little bit deeper because you know usually there's a lot of scars, and you've been at it at Sennder for 10 years now, so there might be some more gems in there that you want to share.
Sure. So maybe one more is, and I just realized 10 years. Yeah. I started in 2014 working on this. So I thought maybe 10 years is wrong, but yeah, I just realized it's really almost 10 years that I'm doing this. Crazy. So maybe another moment that was, I think, defining for us is when we acquired our role model, at least the European operation, when we acquired Uber Freight Europe. I still remember sitting at the notary here in Germany because we were acquiring another player, a French player called Everroad. And while we were in the process, Uber Freight reached out to actually the guy that, we were buying the company from, and was about, okay, now that you're joining forces, let's talk. And I said, okay, interesting. Yeah, this is gonna maybe an opportunity for us now as a clear leader in Europe to potentially even sell our company to Uber Freight that just a few months before that entered the European market. But after first call, it became clear that we actually had an opportunity to acquire their European operation. And this was a very special moment because it was when we realized that we can succeed in Europe. That our value proposition in Europe is significantly stronger, especially compared to that of other players coming from outside of Europe. And it was also the moment where we could show our investors that we can succeed, even though there's a big American player that just a few months earlier was coming in, and this was something that scared a lot of people, especially some of the investors out there. So I still remember when we signed that deal, that was a special moment. Because I always looked up, and I still look up to Uber Freight. They're still partners and now also investors. But securing Europe, then clarifying that we can be and will be the clear leader was another defining moment for us.
What a story, yeah. Talking about another payoff, right? It pays off to talk to to talk to people and even seemingly terrifying or not so terrifying competition, and then sometimes opportunities come out of those discussions.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now on moving the conversation on Sennder where it is today, and also perhaps a little bit the future. I think trucking. There's a lot of discussions by and large around electric vehicles. How will that come into play? Will there be new models that come into play in terms of trucking at large? How do you see these things evolving over the next months and years?
I think this is the reason why I find the space that we're in, trucking and logistics, so exciting. From the outside, it feels like, trucking cool, but there's so much more that is maybe more exciting. But if you understand what are the changes that the logistics industry will experience over the next 10 years, you understand why it's actually a pretty cool space to be in. And there's two big technologies. One you mentioned, electric trucks, and the other one is autonomous trucks. And if you allow me, let's start with the autonomous trucks and then I come back to electric trucks. But to make the idea clear how these models will change the business models in the industry, let's jump into a future. It doesn't matter whether it's in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, where autonomous trucks can drive end to end, completely autonomously, picking up a trailer at the warehouse, passing by schools with small kids, delivering at the next warehouse. It doesn't matter when this is going to happen. But in that future, the 70-80% of the small family-owned trucking companies that today run most of the trucks that we see out there, 70% of all trucks are in fact owned by companies with fewer than 10 trucks. They will have to reinvent themselves, but will definitely lose the reason why they exist today, because they won't be able to buy an autonomous truck. The property will stay with either the manufacturer operator. Imagine if there's an accident or something happening, it's definitely not the responsibility of the small family-owned trucking company that needs to jump in. They won't have to hire and manage a driver, probably the biggest value add today. And they won't be able to optimize costs because they cannot change the oil at the neighbor shop any longer. So 70-80% of this, industry will have to find something else to do. And this also means that if you take the truck manufacturer, for example, and ask them, who are your customers in that future? It's very difficult to answer because most of the truck manufacturers sell to these trucking companies that today run these trucks. In the future, it won't be that they have to evolve the business model. Just producing trucks at a competitive price and high quality is not going to be sufficient to have a value proposition that is strong enough to survive. They have to become maybe operators or even go beyond that. But taking this to today, maybe a quick intermediate step before we come to electric trucks. So when is this future of autonomous coming? The end-to-end will take some time. But when I look at the demographics of truck drivers, I see an aging population. And when I look at, who enters the labor market, the attitude, the willingness also to sacrifice a little bit for their career, I see that the youth does not want to drive trucks. It's a hard job. It's an extremely hard job. So if I look at, again, the demographics, the retirement age of truck drivers, and if I look at, the addition of new truck drivers, it's clear to me that in the next 5 to 7 years, we're going to get to a moment where we won't have enough truck drivers and therefore trucks on the market. And this will be a breaking point where we're going to read in the newspapers, hey, there's no milk in supermarkets. And this is when policymaker will realize, oh, wait, I need to do something. And this is when we're going to see autonomous trucks on the highway, on a separate lane, maybe so with some infrastructure to make them run securely, running from highway entry to highway exit completely autonomously. And then policymakers, being policymakers and being smart, will protect the last trucking mile from the exit of the highway to the warehouse and back, and make sure that this aging truck driver population can then shuttle the trailers back and forth and protecting them, just like in some European countries, the taxi industry is protected, also that category. And that's what I expect. And this is something that therefore I expect in the next 10 years, but this is where companies have to really start now evolve the business model. And now finally coming to the electric truck question that you mentioned, this is happening already today. But electric trucks cost 2, 3, sometimes even 4 times more than diesel trucks. So why would a small trucking company with 3 trucks buy a 4th truck that costs more than the entire fleet without knowing residual value, without knowing what the true operating costs are, and without knowing if anyone pays a small premium for a greener transport? And that's where also today we're really seeing some new business model emerging. We created one with Scania and joint venture called Juna.com, where it's one approach where we offer trucks with a pay-per-use model, where the small trucking companies can get an electric truck and only pay per kilometer. So they only pay when they drive. And Sennder on the other side guarantees utilization, effectively minimizing, if not completely eliminating any adoption risk, because you drive only when, you pay only when you drive, and when you drive, you have a load that is guaranteed by Sennder. So already today we see an evolution of business models, and I think this is something, coming back to my original point, that is super exciting, because we can at Sennder really shape how the future of this industry was going to look like. And it's a big industry, as you said in your introduction.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, you got me thinking. I never quite looked that far out in the future. So let me double click a little bit. So what would you do then if you were a owner of a, I don't know, 10 truck, 5 truck, 20 truck company today to prepare yourself for the next couple of years?
Well, the first thing is embrace technology, digitalization. At Sennder today, one of the biggest challenges we have, if maybe not the biggest, is to push tech adoption. When we call a small trucking company, tell them, hey, you want to work with us, and please do everything, digitally, sign up, upload, and we can still talk and help you understand how you can expand our business. We can help you get access to electric trucks or diesel trucks, fuel cards, and so on, and measure your performance and help you. But the day-to-day, do it digitally, put the number plate, accept order. This is a big barrier. And there's a lot of resistance of small trucking companies to embrace this new way of working. Why? Because for 20, 30 years, they've been using, they moved maybe away from fax machines to emails. But other than that, there was no big change in the way they operate. So that's the first step. So embrace, innovation, embrace technology, try something new. And then when try something also on the electric front, learn with it, especially, with solution like the one I proposed. The risk is small. You just have to learn and evolve. And then when the time will come for, I think, the autonomous trucks on the highway, I think at least for 20, if not 30 years, and this is then policymakers that will dictate both the timeline and the extent, shuttling trailers from the exit of the highway to the warehouse and back is what they will be focusing on, and this will also help truck drivers sleep at home every night. And coming back to your question, how can they evolve the business model, can really prepare to say, hey, it's going to be much more local, the trucking, and that's why we can also think about differently in how we set up our operations, where we base the drivers, how we manage also the driver pool for that future.
And just out of curiosity, because there usually are some early adopters, right? And you work with a lot of these smaller companies. Any example that jumps to mind that maybe reached you of some of these companies that have embraced or have done the right things, and that has positively impacted either how much business they did or their growth, or some sort of a metric that would demonstrate clearly to the others that, hey, jump on the bandwagon?
Absolutely. I'm not sure whether I should and can share the specific name, but there's one trucking company in Germany, in the Stuttgart area, that has been embracing this to 100% and just starting with us, working with HVO a couple of years ago when HVO was new, and experimenting with that. They're also running our first Juna truck, the first Juna truck that we put on the road, and took this pay-per-use model. So there are a few very forward-looking companies that are embracing this transformation and this change, but I have to admit that it's the minority, unfortunately. And from my observation, it's also then the younger generation. So it's when there's a generational change in these companies, and maybe the younger generation taking over from the parents, when the willingness to try and experiment something new, both the way of working with the digital interaction with Sennder, but also trying some of these newer solutions, is really happening. But I'm hopeful that over the next few years, we're going to see more and more companies, opening, trying something new, and embracing the change that, in my eyes, is coming no matter what.
And also a driving force for change I would say, is clearly sustainability, greener solutions, companies, the shippers, right? The large shippers of this world, whether it's AB InBev or Coca-Cola, or God knows, right? Everybody is looking into the scope 3 emissions, right? So logistics falls into that. How can it be greener? How can it be sustainable? They have some fairly aggressive targets. There is, however, still the dilemma, I feel, that, yeah, but that's important, but as long as I don't pay for it more or much more, almost, it's like how do you think this will play out over time? Because we tend to want to do the right thing, but it's the same as a consumer, right? You and me walking into a supermarket, and again, maybe in the Western world or in developed economies, maybe there's much more likely that there's a certain premium we might pay for a product that is sustainably made or shipped. In emerging economies, I don't think. I think very clearly people will go for the cheapest. Yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, we have to be at the forefront in offering these solutions. And then the question is who adopts and who pays for it. What we observed is that it's coming from, in Europe at least, the developed country in Europe, from north to south. So Scandinavia is, the first adopters, and coming out to, more continental Europe, Netherlands, Germany. This is where it's coming, and the south of Europe is, unfortunately, on these points, always a bit coming a bit later. But what I observed is that a lot of these big shippers that we serve, FMCG, e-commerce companies, they all committed, or most of them, maybe even all, committed to certain CO2 emission reduction targets. And the way they typically phrased it, to simplify, they say, across our business, we're going to be reducing our emissions by X% in the next whatever years. And transportation is one of the few areas where it's extremely, extremely difficult to really make it. If you have a warehouse, you put solar panels. If you have packaging, you can, there's a lot of things that you can, do on the rest of the business. And transportation is always extremely, extremely hard. And that's why it's always last to be addressed. But over the past 2 or 3 years, we saw that large shippers that are increasingly securing budgets to pay for the small premium that is required. It's not a lot to really achieve these CO2 emissions. And currently, there's still, we're in the ramp-up phase. The budgets are there, but there's also the entire topic of transparency, carbon accounting. If someone pays a premium for green transport, the shipper also needs to make sure that they can account for the CO2 savings. And this is another level of complexity that we're introducing in transportation, because you need to know that that specific truck, drove that specific load and either put that type of fuel like HVO that reduces CO2 emissions by 90% or electric, and then have to make sure that, that information is secured and that it's that fuel that was really in that truck. And then I have to go for fuel cards and have to link all of that and then push it back to the shipper and say, hey, our process is rock solid, is certified, so that you in your own reporting can account for that. And that's still, the part that at least in the industry is missing. And that's one small but very important piece, which is, I think, keeping still today a little bit green transport to really get the investments that sometimes are already there. At Sennder, we, I think, are at the forefront of this, but when I look at the industry, that's the piece that is missing. And that's why I expect that once also a few other players find a way to do this end-to-end carbon accounting, that there will be a meaningful pickup in investments in green transport.
Yeah, no, for sure, regulation and frameworks and all of these good things need to follow. There's also practicality, I guess, right? So I was talking to a chief supply chain officer, a very large company. He told me like, look, Radu, I mean, we have a lot of different initiative. Is one of these was from my team like, okay, let's buy some electric trucks. And I told them, look, guys, there's stuff like grid, like there's stuff like a bunch of
Infrastructure.
a bunch of very practical constraints. Now, a model that you're suggesting, right, where you have that partnership directly with the manufacturer of the trucks, and then you ensure utilization on the side of the trucking company. I mean, that to me makes a lot more sense, right? And there's a lot less risk, because if you own it yourself as the shipper, or if you try to do it yourself, there's a bunch of stuff. Whereas if you have a pooling system, and you work on the principle of collaboration, I think that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I agree, but I still have to point out the charging infrastructure for the trucking industry is going to be a bottleneck, a massive bottleneck, and that we need policymakers to support and invest in this. We now found a model where we can, start. But if you really think about the next 3, 4, 5 years, if you really want to scale it, yeah, the charging infrastructure that we rely on, which is also public, but very local, is not going to be sufficient. Yeah, so it's still a bit of a question mark that I also have. How can we really scale electrification in trucking if we don't have the infrastructure that is needed? And this is why, again, we need to invest, and we need politicians to understand that and support that.
Now, on the topic of talent and people, I wanted to also ask you some questions. I mean, when you build, any company, it's the crux of success or failure is ultimately people, not tech, even if a lot of times a lot of us seem to talk much more about tech than about people. But and I know, and we've had direct experience. I mean, with each other, we work together on a role together. I've seen you guys, and I will also say this on air. I was completely impressed by the attention that you yourself as the CEO of Sennder pay to bringing the right talent into the company, and making sure that that those discussions, that the processes run properly, that they get to know the company really well, they get to know the team that they're part of really well. So I'd love to get a little bit your sharing around what are some of the principles that you follow when it comes to hiring, attracting, retaining top talent.
Maybe I start with a small story. You mentioned that I was a consultant at a company called Roland Berger. Back then, I assumed that HR and everything related to people was kind of a back office task that was not important. I was proven so wrong. I feel so stupid that I thought about that. I realized that the people side, bringing the right people and developing the right talent, is the most important driver of success of a company. It's even more important than technology, because only technology is developed by the people and that you bring in. So when I learned this very early on in my career at Sennder, we tried to put a lot of emphasis on this aspect. It starts with the hiring. Happy to give you some insights on that, how, especially for the senior talents, we approach that. You mentioned a few things already, but also we organize once a year something we call summer camp, where we bring together the entire company, almost 1,000 people in one location in Italy, which is always a massive investment. But it's also the one thing that kept the culture evolving, but based on the fundamental values that we have from day one, allowing us to attract even more talent because of this, and retaining talent much longer. And just these two things, we are trying to quantify them, but the attraction of more talent and the retention of talent justifies this investment, according to my perspective. And then we also chose a slightly different approach to identify high potential talent and develop that. So we've been trying to put a lot of emphasis on this. And to be honest, it's fun to create a company, and hopefully in a few years when I'm going to be looking back, these are the things that I will remember, and these are the things I will be proud of. And this is why I'm also personally investing quite some time into these topics.
Let me maybe make it even more practical for the people that are listening. So in the process that we did together, yeah, I mean, you literally flew, and I mean, I imagine you're not sitting idle, yeah, as the CEO of a company. So you took time to fly to meet in person with the with the candidate that was a leading candidate at that time. Now, not with everybody, that probably is not is an overstretch, but a couple of the co-founders of Sennder did the same. So again, there were literal trips which were not necessarily easy to make, but it just showed a lot of commitment. So it wasn't even that the candidate, I mean, the candidate also came and visited Sennder, yeah, but you guys went and met, and I know that also part of your process is sometimes like have dinner with the husband, with the wife, have those discussions also, and have that family buy-in. I think this is something that I'm enforcing here on the podcast. I mean, our bread and butter is executive search, and we work with multinationals and corporations and scale ups and all sorts of companies all over the world. I haven't seen this done on. I wouldn't say this is something normal or or a practice that I have seen, and I think it should be, because to the point, people make the company, then the company helps customers, right? And I think most companies don't get this quite as well as you do.
For us, it was something that we did from day one. For both, when I was still living with my co-founders, I still live in the same apartment, but we used to live together. And every time we brought in either a new investor or a C-level or VP level into the company, we organized a dinner at our place. And we invited the family of, let's say, the candidates and also our investors before we signed into our home, to have this moment together. So it's not just a meeting, it's a shared meal. And it's surprising to see, how much you learn about people and how much you build this gut feeling. Is this the right match or not? And I still remember back then there were at least two candidates that after the dinner we developed that feeling it's probably not going to work out. Yeah. And this is where it's coming from now with the size of the company and the not living any longer together. It became more difficult to do it at our home, but having this meal together, ideally with the family, if they want, not everyone is open to that, is for me, I think, an important milestone, because the family is behind that decision as well and impacts the family as well, and giving them, making them part of the process. So we also send, I don't know, typically to the family of our hires, little gifts, little Sennder jumpers, is also very cute and very small sizes. So, to make them part a little bit of this journey. At the end of the day, it's an important decision for both sides. It's not only the commitment, but also the commitment to a new way of working for especially senior hires. And this is why for me, it's super important that we spend that time showing who we are before someone commits. We did the mistake in the past a couple of times that we hired very senior people that did not really know what they were getting into, because we didn't fully, either open up or didn't, manage the process with the discipline that you just described. And then a few months in, we just realized, okay, it's, a different world, and these individuals that have been operating 20, 30 years in a different tend always to go then back to their way and don't embrace our way. And that's then so painful for everyone to manage. This is why, we now, especially for the search that you mentioned, but also we have hired a few C-levels over the past few months. Really, we're very strict in making sure that, we open up as much as we can and need, and the other side sees, as well as, us expecting the same for the other side, because only then you can start building that relationship, that trust relationship, which is super important, but also really develop that gut feeling around, hey, do it, really think that's the right thing? And if I say yes, do you really then change? Because also we have to change every time we bring someone in, just like the person that comes in needs to change to make this work.
Love it. Final question from me, David. One or two pieces of advice for the younger generation out there, whether they are just starting their careers, whether some of them are maybe thinking to set up a company, start something and disrupt the industry. What comes to mind?
Take an active role in hiring the right people. And I know that especially in the early days now, also at bigger companies, carving out the time to leading key processes in hiring, it's just painful. Because when I say, take the time, it's not just doing the 30 minutes last interviews, yes, no kind of thing. It's if you do a search process, which by the way, I learned to appreciate. I struggled at the beginning because of the early stage founder mindset related to the fee structure. But, if you hire senior talent, you can probably not approach the same time of talent that someone like you, Radu, can approach. But then structure the process from day one. Be there in defining what are the profiles that you're looking, what is important, what you want to avoid, what are the compromises that you're willing to do, and what are the compromises you're not willing to do, location, I don't know, maybe language, expertise, and so on and so forth. And then you'll be a part of the process, and go in on a weekly basis and reviewing the profiles, push very hard, and then of course be also part of the process. For a number of processes that are very important to me, I typically do the first call and then the last meeting, which is then this joint meal, and in between, depending on how it is, I jump in. And I would recommend every younger leader to really invest the time it's worth. Having just better leader has such an exponential effect on the organization, because they're gonna then hire the next level of leaders, and then all of those people will then take the strategic decision that will define the make or break. So while it's sometimes painful to invest the time up front, I think the return on that investment is so massive and typically underestimated. Take the time to run a process, be part of it, and then ensure that you also sell the company and yourself to the candidate to ensure that everything is aligned and there's no surprises further down the road.
No, I love it. Well, David, it's been an absolute pleasure. And as your motto, and as I've seen you so many times sign off on your email, keep trucking and keep making a dent and changing the way the trucking industry as a whole operates.
Thank you, Radu.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.